Hey, housewives.
Hey, hey.
Oh my goodness, this was so helpful. This was so helpful.
So helpful.
I mean, Tracy asked all the questions, and granted, she did.
I did try to get him to solve world peace.
It is true. But we got actionable takeaway things that help us sleep better tonight.
Yes.
I mean, one, I knew and you didn't, which was
Mhm.
awesome.
Yeah,
The 15-minute rule.
I know.
And
I
then
hope you do feel better about that,
I
knowing
do.
something more than I do.
Yes, it
Because
is
I'm so
because
wise in
you're,
everything.
you are so wise in everything. So it's the one time.
Just
And
yeah,
it
you
wasn't
just
an
get that
abbreviation
one
that our kids are texting, or it wasn't anything of like that where I'm like, what?
Oh.
But that helpful tip. And then
Mhm.
also his 5 sleepless night rules
Yeah,
on just how to make a sleepless night better
yeah.
and every day after.
Right. You'll hear him break it down. He also will talk about his book that is in all of this. It's a devotional. It's an action thing to help you
A
walk
sleep
through.
journal
Yeah, to help
devotional.
you walk through the nights when you're struggling. And this episode is for everyone because it's for the mama who has new babies. He is a pediatric sleep doctor. So he works with helping, little kids and all the way up to, teenagers and mamas
Tracy's age.
and my age. And we
So,
don't have to talk about that. But he is fantastic. He has so much knowledge. He talks and he is a Christian. And we love how he brings in the spiritual aspect of how God sees you in the dark and in those sleepless nights and how hard it is. And I know what it's like having nights like that. And I just found like just so much validation, just feeling seen and all the stuff that he was saying. And that is one of the things that I think you guys will, have a takeaway from and lots of good action items.
yes, very much so. So without further ado, enjoy.
Enjoy. Hey, hey, welcome back.
Welcome back. Oh my goodness. How has it taken us this long?
4 years.
4 years to get a guest about this topic.
Yeah.
Mom, well, where was he 12 years ago? I'd like to know because
Or in my most recent season.
or yeah. Oh, that's true too. Yeah. Well, we have questions, but this is going to be a fantastic guest because I don't care what part of season life you're in, you
Mhm.
have dealt with this problem at some point in time. And if you haven't, you will. So, Tracy, please welcome our guest
Yeah.
to the episode.
Well, welcome Dr. Benjamin Long. He is a sleep doctor by day and seminary student by night with an interest in the integration of theology and sleep. These interests have culminated into his debut book, Sleep Habits Journal: Practices, Prayers, and Devotions to Ease Your Sleepless Nights. He lives in San Antonio, Texas with his wife and son. Welcome to the Unlikely Housewives.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be on.
Okay. So, I have found that a person who is a really heavy sleeper and a really light sleeper that they and without knowing it, they marry each other
Yes, all the time.
all the time. And it doesn't matter. The one person, they can wake up when a mouse farts and the other person can sleep through a train. Like,
Right.
how is that possible? Is that just the gift of God saying, "Oh, I'll show you what marriage looks like"? Is that where
It's a great
wait,
place to
so
start, Tori.
I'm just
Yeah.
that's I feel like
Yeah,
that's a good common denominator. Anybody else? Yes.
absolutely. Yeah. It's so surprising because I hear that story all the time, especially so even though my niche is pediatric sleep, I'm board certified to treat all ages. So I have experience treating adults as well. And so many of my patients who experience insomnia, they're like, I get so mad at my husband because I'm there tossing and turning. I don't fall asleep until 3 a.m. and he hits the pillow and in like 2 seconds, he's out. Like, what is that? And I sit and I listen and I nod and I'm like, yes.
Sometimes that's all they need. Okay, but what is it? I have a question because what does it mean if I'm the one that my head hits the pillow and I'm knocked out and my husband is the light sleeper?
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's the craziest thing because he's like, "You didn't hear that?" I'm like, "No, no, no. I didn't hear the storm. I didn't hear the children. I didn't hear
Right.
anything."
Right.
And he's gifted with that
Yeah. You
hearing.
know, it's interesting because we one thing we talk about when we're talking about sleep quality is something called sleep efficiency. And so that's the percentage of time that you are spending in your bed that you're actually asleep. And we would like think, oh, shouldn't that be like 100%? But actually, a normal sleep efficiency for most adults is going to be in between 85 to 95%. And so sometimes, I'm not speaking this over you, Tori, but sometimes the people who their head hits the pillow, I'm like, actually, you may be like so exhausted or your sleep is like so disrupted that it's just no problem for you to fall asleep. So, some people, they like will talk to me and tell themselves like, oh, yeah, like I have no problem. I like my head hits the pillow and I fall asleep. And I'm like, are you
Not a
like
great
super?
thing.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not as good as
exactly.
you think it is.
Yeah.
So, okay, what is normal sleep for a child? I mean, that's a great place to
Yeah.
start. I mean, because either we feel like they're not getting enough, and then all of a
Mhm.
sudden they turn into teenagers,
Teenagers
and
and
then
they
you're
don't go
like,
to sleep.
they don't go to sleep or they sleep until noon. Am I totally screwing up my kid's circadian rhythm? Did I say that right?
Yeah.
I'm letting him sleep until noon. Do I, like that's a very broad question, but I feel
Yeah.
like as parents, we're like, is
Mhm.
this? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think most now, because sleep has become so mainstreamed of a issue, I think most people hear 7 to 9 hours for adults, and that's kind of what like sticks in our head. But children actually sleep much more. So oftentimes when I'm taking care of babies in the newborn nursery, I tell new parents that babies sleep 14 to 17 hours per 24-hour period. Unfortunately, that's not one giant stretch.
Mhm.
Sorry. It would be really nice if you
Mhm.
got a 14-hour break in that first month, but that's not the case. And so from there, you have that 14 to 17, and then actually close to about the 2 month mark. That's like that first quote unquote sleep regression that a
Mhm.
lot of people experience, where there's a jump and it goes down to 12 to 15. And that's where most babies, when you're including all naps and daytime sleep plus overnight sleep, should be roughly about 12 to 15 hours. It does not feel that way. Most of the time I'm talking to
No.
moms and they're like, no, that's not possible
Yeah.
until like
Not
I
unless
have.
they're sleeping on me.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Right, and
Exactly.
so that's why one of the things I have incorporated most into my practice that I really love is keeping a sleep diary, because that's really powerful to actually just get it down on the page so that way you can see what's going on. And of course, most of the patients that I see, I say like 12 to 15 hours is kind of typical for that infant time frame, but we know that there's going to be a certain percentage of kids that are in that like 10 to 11 hours. And so if you think of like a typical bell curve, two standard deviations is that like 95th percentile cutoff. We don't ever talk about those kids who are in the 90th to 95th percentile. And that is a huge chunk of people that I actually see, that I am talking to families, because I'm like, yes, your kid isn't here in the middle. They're down here towards the end. It's not so far that it's anything concerning necessarily for their health, but this is really difficult for you and your family and your
Mhm.
schedule and your functioning and all that kind of stuff. So it is a lot of education of talking about what's typical for age. And as kids continue to get older, then that goes down to 9 to 11 hours is typical for school age children. And then 8 to 10 hours is typical for teenagers. And so, but definitely in that first 2 years of life, we don't really think about it this way, but sleep is the primary activity of life in the first 2 years. Like
Mhm.
more than anything else, because it's greater than for most kids, 12 hours.
Yeah.
Literally, that is the thing that they are doing. And yet, pediatric sleep is such a new field. And with any kind of medical discipline, when you look at the amount of research that we have for adults versus pediatrics, it's always a lot less in pediatrics.
Mhm.
And so the same thing in sleep. We have a lot less pediatric sleep research going on compared to adult sleep.
Yeah.
And there's still so much that we are trying to figure out or to help support. And so that's been one of the really interesting things to see, is like there's this, we know more and more that development is so critical in the first 5 years of life. And so often when I am teaching pediatricians or other, family physicians, and I talk to them about that of like, hey, sleep is actually critical in these first 2 years. And so you really need to figure out what are the red flags that you need to kind of search for. Because if you're just telling moms, oh, they'll outgrow it, oh, that's fine, it's just a
Mhm.
regression, and you don't have that appropriate thing, then that might be something that is important that needs to be seen by a sleep physician.
So when you're meeting with parents, because I was one firstborn, didn't sleep through the night till 14 months, and
Mhm.
through the night was like I was just trying to get a 6-hour stretch, like,
Yeah.
and it was rough, and that's all I knew. And at that point we were like, we are maybe having 2 kids, like, oh, I can't keep doing this. Like,
Yeah.
because the problem that I always have, I struggle with insomnia. Used to. I mean, I have had many seasons. It was when I was pregnant. That was awful. Then obviously the newborn. And then just hormonal shifts here in the last few years have caused insomnia, which we'll talk about later. That is something that we want you to address, is like some of the big things around insomnia. But in that, like, you're trying to get a kid to sleep through the night to have that stretch so that so the mamas can catch up. Is there a, standard, or, what should mamas be doing to try to get that long stretch?
Oh, yeah. I think there's a lot of ways we can go with this question. One, just in general, we know that most infants are going to have a jump in their consolidation of sleep as early as about 4 to 6 weeks of life. A lot of times when I'm talking to families, I call the first 3 months of life the fourth trimester. And I just am like,
Mhm.
do whatever you have to do to survive. Because oftentimes I'll have moms in tears who are like, oh my gosh, my baby fell asleep at the breast, but he's supposed to fall asleep in the crib. And I just don't know what's going on. And the sleep and the eating and all of that's not like
Mhm.
matching up. And I'm like, let's take a deep breath. There's grace. That is okay. And in the real way, when we're talking about sleep training or things that you can do for sleep, really that can't start until closer to 4 to 6 months, anyways. 6 months is typical, 4 months is usually the earliest. And some of that matches with when they've done functional MRI scans for infants. The hippocampus, the part of the brain that's responsible for
Mhm.
memory, that really doesn't start getting active until closer to that 4 to 6 month time, which is also when we think babies are starting to get some of that object permanence where the ball falls away and it's not just disappeared in their consciousness. They actually start looking for it, kind of a
Yeah.
thing.
Mhm.
And so so before that, it's like infants don't even have the memory to be able to start that sleep training. So that's
Mhm.
why I'm like, it's a get out of jail free card. Just like do
Yeah.
whatever you can
Mhm. Yep.
in those
Yep.
first few months. And so a lot of times I'm talking to parents just about building good habits in those
Mhm.
first, few months. And of course, I tell every single family sleep is a biological and psychological process in a social cultural context. So when I'm seeing you in my office, I have a big packet that we fill out, but a lot of that also goes into your social history, your support network, what's important to you, your religious background as well, and all of these different factors about yourself, and trying to figure out what are you hoping to kind of move toward. You go online about pediatric sleep, and there is just a huge fight and fire everywhere about to sleep trained, to not sleep trained, to do this, to not do this,
Mhm.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And really, I, try to kind of get back to what do we need to do for you and your family? Because so much of my experience has been military families. So you're in Alaska and you're geographically separated from your entire support network. Your spouse is out in the field training and it's just you, and oh by the way, you're 6 months pregnant and you have three other kids all under 6'2", and you're
Mhm.
And
trying to
it's
get this baby.
and it's daylight for
Yeah,
like 20
Yeah.
hours. Like,
right,
that's not a problem. Like,
exactly.
whoa. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that is very different from the mom who lives in a small town, grandparents are
Mhm.
down the street, and I have a
Right.
huge support system. And like, I'm okay with my child co-rooming with me and being in the same environment and the amount of sleep that I'm currently getting. And it's not really within my goals to sleep training. Surprisingly, a lot of people expect me as the sleep doctor to be like, sleep train all your babies. And I'm like, no, because there's no evidence that it actually has any kind of long-term benefit. And exactly like what you're saying, Tracy, so much of it is all for mom's mental health as well.
Yeah. Mhm.
And sometimes I try to be really sensitive here too, because I don't want us to necessarily go along with the narrative of you have to sleep train in order to promote mom's mental health as well. And really, that's where a lot of my perspective in theology and thinking about the stories that we tell ourselves with the sleepless night and what that means. And so oftentimes it really can just be somewhat of a mindset shift too, of like, where is God meeting me in this season that I'm in right now? And when you're sleep deprived, it is really hard to have
It
that
is.
reflection.
It's very
Yeah.
it is a very dark time, and
Yes.
I can speak to that
No pun
because
intended.
yeah,
Yeah.
right? But when it's the middle of the night
Mhm.
and the anxiety of like, I just need to sleep. I'm going to be tired tomorrow. I got to settle my mind down. And they're like, okay, I'm going to quote scripture, but you're not in the right. It's really, really hard to come back, and rest. But I love you continue because I love that you're connecting the theology and the psychology of it.
Yeah. And so that's why when I'm meeting with a family, I really try to get a broad holistic picture of who is this person sitting in front of me?
Mhm,
Where are they moving towards? What are their goals? And then also just I see myself as a physician as someone who is just accompanying you on your journey through the sleepless night. And that's really what I try to provide to the families that are experiencing this of saying, "Hey, we're in a tough season for sure." Like
mhm,
I sometimes one we just need to acknowledge that and see that, and I can sure would imagine you would attest how powerful that can be just to be seen because the
mhm,
sleepless night is
mhm,
so isolating and
mhm,
feels so lonely and like nobody sees you. And that's the beautiful thing when we have the extra layer of the connection of both being Christians is
mhm.
that we know that there's a God who sees you, who is always there. And actually, he's the one walking with you. I'm here for 15 minutes when you're here in my office,
Right,
kind of a thing.
right.
But no matter what, God is always there available to you in that sleepless night. So,
Mhm,
what are the things that are in my toolbox for the journey? And, sometimes that is a medication, sometimes that is a behavioral intervention. And so it's really just trying to find what is the tools that are needed right now for this leg of the journey
mhm.
and how are we going to kind of continue that together.
That's so good. I wanna go back to the whole insomnia because I did say I wanted to ask that question. One of the things that you had expressed, and by the way, we have to give a shout out to Podmatch for how we got connected to
Yes,
Dr. Benjamin
Podmatch. Thank you
Long.
so much.
Podmatch is a network that we are on, and just incredible to be able to meet people like this. But one of the things that you said is there are a lot of factors that play into insomnia. Granted, what age, do you see that starting to develop? And what are some of those factors? Because I would say I have a teenager who is very much that way. And I don't know if that's just habits, right? Of like just
Yeah.
staying up late and loving that time and then sleeping from like 2 a.m. to, 11 a.m. That's only on the weekends,
Yeah.
obviously not for school, but it's like it is hard to
Yeah.
like navigate that.
For sure. For insomnia, we typically talk about it in the what's called the 3P model, so that there are certain predisposing factors that are going to kind of get you closer to some kind of a insomnia threshold. There's some precipitating factor that's going to trigger that, and then there's what's called perpetuating factors. And so a lot of kind of what I think you're asking at one level is that predisposing. What are those predisposing kind of factors? And, as y'all have experienced being women with children are some of those predisposing factors. We
Mm.
do think that there is some amount of a family history or genetic component. When we talk about like good or bad sleepers, some people will kind of be frustrated at that language of good versus bad sleepers. But we know that there are some people that they, even from a very young age, infants are going to have certain levels of what we call quiet sleep versus active sleep. And that quiet and active is talking about brain activity, not body activity. And there's different percentages. Not all infants are the same. And so we think that, like some of the kids who just have sleep problems is that they may not just get as much quiet sleep as some of those other kids, which I don't usually talk to families who are experiencing that because that's not something that you can modify or control. All I can
Right.
say is be like, sorry, you got a bad sleeper. So
Yeah.
that's
That's
some of
your
that's not
Yeah.
going to change. Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
Mhm.
and families, I hear that quite frequently of like, mom's like, I've always had insomnia. My first one was great. But then my second kid, I feel like he's like me and he can't
Mhm.
sleep at all. But now my third one is also a great sleeper. So it really is dependent. And so you can have a variety of those predisposing factors. Not all of those are necessarily inherent. Some of that could be environmental. If you
Mhm.
are socioeconomically in a place where there's a lot of environmental violence, then that is not going to be as, helpful for good sleep. If you're constantly in fight or flight and
Mhm.
afraid kind of a thing. So, and then the actual precipitating factors are stresses in your life. And I tell my families to live is to experience precipitating factors. That
Mhm.
no matter what happens, we're going to always have these stressors in our lives. And so, really, when we're talking about treatment for insomnia, that's getting at the perpetuating factors. And that sometimes you can have these behaviors that are helpful in the short run, but they actually tend to kind of perpetuate your insomnia. And that is a lot of what I try to kind of get at in the book. And that we have seen with cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is actually helpful for addressing those things if they are present.
And your book is it's a devotional, am I right?
Yeah. So it's called Sleep Habits Journal. It is really, I would say it's the insomnia book for people who hate reading. Because as opposed to typical nonfiction trade books where you read a whole chapter and then there might be like 5 questions at
Mhm.
the end, this is really geared around what I call the sleepless night rules, where it's these 5 rules that are easy steps of anytime you're faced with a sleepless night, you can start these rules and they're going to help you have better sleep habits as you're moving on your journey through the sleepless night. But then we all know knowing something and being able to do it are 2 totally different things.
Oh,
Otherwise, I'd
I
be
know I
w
should exercise.
right,
Right,
like, I would
exactly.
be way more rich and, way more successful if I could just tell people, "Do this," and they're like, "Ah, I did it, and then it's
Yeah,
perfect and
it's
everything's
great.
fine."
Yeah.
So, so the journal is set up in a way to where if you're having a certain, issue with, let's say, one of the things is if you can't fall asleep, then actually rising out of bed after roughly, 15 to 20 minutes. And you're like, that is the part I never can get past, like I know I need to like get out of bed because I'm not falling asleep, but then I always have this like thought of, well, what if sleep's just right around the corner? And let me just like turn over and maybe that will do the trick.
Mm.
And so then you can go into things both from sleep medicine of here's some tips, here's some education, here's some behavioral modifications of things you can do, but then tries to bring in that Christian worldview of, you know, what are we actually doing when we are rising? If the spiritual life does not stop with bedtime, all of life is part of our spiritual walks. And so what kind of a person am I becoming in my sleepless night? And really, I see that moment specifically of rising is this kind of pivotal moment where I can kind of stay in this frustration and this, tossing and turning both within my body and my spirit, or I can choose to turn to God and to something else. And that is like a critical point where it may not make a difference tonight or the next night, but every decision that we make is forming us into a certain kind of person. And
Mhm.
so over time, you're becoming a person who, when you're experiencing that, you're choosing to connect with God. You're choosing to move in a different direction. And that embodied choice is something that science doesn't necessarily have a good narrative for us to talk about.
That reminds me of I mean, it's essentially doing self-control. It's
Mhm,
like, I can get my body up. I don't want to. If I take the covers off, I'm going to be cold. I'm not,
Mhm.
like it's going to feel, I'm going to be awake more if I do
mhm,
this, and then, but it's because we were talking about that in my small group. We were talking about like fasting. Fasting itself is a great discipline to learn because then it also makes you remind yourself like you are in control of your body, your
Mhm.
functions,
Mhm.
and that your mind is more powerful than your body and that God created us that way. So it is actually, but it was just like we were talking about that, but that in itself, like just the habit of getting up, like, okay, I've been tossing and turning, I just
Mhm.
need to get up is an exercise in self control, which is one of the fruit of the spirits.
mhm,
So,
And I was gonna say with that too, because I have a daughter who's been in therapy for obsessive compulsive disorder. She has OCD. And so cognitive behavior therapy is what we know and what we do. And it's worked wonders. And it's so funny that, I mean, I've never in all of my years been told to get up if I can't sleep.
mhm.
really?
No.
Yeah.
Holy crap. Like
No.
I knew that.
No.
And I'm not
so
the
that's
insomniac.
right. Isn't that crazy? Well, it's
That's
also
so weird.
it's so funny because that's just one step of like, okay, after 15 minutes, get up, and if you do that and then, go do something, fill your mind, change your heart, those types of things, then come back to bed, maybe it'll reset, which I love. So what do you have a couple other tips from your book that you can share that are like that?
Yeah, I mean, we can just walk through the sleepless night rules in and of themselves is, number one, I say cease before bedtime and lie down once you feel sleepy. Number two, rise from bed if you cannot fall asleep. Number three, connect with God and wait to feel sleepy. Number four, lie down and repeat rules two and three if you can't fall asleep. And then number five, resist sleeping in and taking naps. And a lot of times I get to that last one and people are like, "Oh, my naps."
You
You got
laughed
that.
me.
You
You
got
laughed
the
me
ooh on
on
her.
You
naps.
lost me. No, I was
Yes,
on board
naps.
and then you said no naps.
Yep. I'm pretty sure in the Bible Jesus took naps. I'm just
Yeah.
saying there were a
Yeah.
couple of naps in there. I think I even
You
have the
might
shirt
you
that's
need to
that.
explain yourself a little bit on that one.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So
Right.
what? Talk to me about naps because I feel like that is catching up on it's like on the weekends. Our family is really good at. Well, no. Let me rephrase that. I'm
You
really
are
good
good
at
at taking a
naps.
nap.
Yes. And my husband sometimes can, sometimes can't. And then my girls enjoy just a couple, a little bit of screen time of their own quiet space. But okay, why are we losing naps?
Right. And I think I intentionally worded that as resist to kind of say, and it's hard. Sleepless night rules just rolls off the tongues, which is why I call them rules. They are based off of a intervention in cognitive behavioral therapy called stimulus control instructions. And they use the language of instructions because they're like, it's not a rule that's like hard and fast.
It's a tool, not a yes kind of thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And so in the book, I talk about like, hey, this is the ideal. If you are not able to sleep, then we know that naps you can think about as kind of like a bank that you're inserting so much kind of deposits for your sleep pressure that you are kind of accumulating day after day after day. And so if you're only operating out of like a 5-hour balance, but then you take a 30-minute to an hour long nap, then you might only have, 4 hours left in the bank. And so part of it is just talking about how do I take naps as far as duration, the timing of it, closer to bedtime versus farther around bedtime. So there is a little bit of wiggle room there. And then also it depends on who I'm talking to too. If someone is like, I sleep on the weekends and I don't have any problems with, my sleep during the rest of the week, then I'm like, great, cool. Go ahead and go for that. And that's so much of sleep. I have people who've told me they have a cup of coffee after dinner. And I'm like, if you don't have, I was like, if you
I'm raising
don't
my
have,
hand for audio listeners.
Yeah,
Sorry.
well, and she can, and I can't have caffeine after 2 p.m. or I'm
yeah,
in trouble. Like
I
I know
can't.
what is my word? My
Predisposition, predis.
wait, what are
Wait,
the
no,
things that
dang
I
it.
can control? What was your
Yeah.
word?
oh, yeah, like your perpetuating
Yes,
factors
my
or your
perpetuating
contagious
factors. No
factors.
caffeine.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And, that's the issue sometimes with insomnia management, how it is typically given in a lot of formats is oftentimes it's just a tip sheet. Mental health practitioners, they are facing so many varieties of different kind of mental health problems. So sleep isn't necessarily always at the forefront. And so they can kind of get into a pattern of, oh, here is a sleep hygiene tip of things that are good things of like, don't drink caffeine after a certain time. Don't have any screens in the bedroom. Have the temperature at 68 to 71 degrees. Like all of these things that are good for sleep. The problem is sleep hygiene, if you're experiencing insomnia, doesn't get to that root cause. And
Right.
so some of those maladaptive behaviors is that sleeping in or taking a really long nap because it's stealing from your sleep pressure for the next night, essentially. And
So
so,
can you
oh,
catch up on sleep?
yeah, there's mixed research for when we're talking about like sleep banking or kind of catching up on sleep or things of that nature because the hard part is sometimes like we can see something in the lab. So for instance, when we're talking about your circadian rhythm,
Mhm.
that is the 24-hour waxing and waning power that you can think of it as like an activating pressure. So whereas your sleep pressure, the longer you're awake, you're going to have more buildup of adenosine is kind of a simple way for us to talk about it. So that's your brain using energy, the byproduct of that builds. And then once you fall asleep, then your brain's drainage system, the lymphatic system, starts to help kind of get all of that out. And so that is the sleep pressure. Your circadian rhythm is kind of the opposite. And so that's why if you have been awake for 24 hours and then all of a sudden you get to mid morning the next day and you have this like slight boost in your energy and you're like, this is weird because I've been awake for now 26 hours or something like that. And yet I don't feel super sleepy. Part of that is because your circadian rhythm is an activating rhythm that kind of comes on the upswing and then comes down. So all of that to say, in the lab, we tend to be pretty successful of being able to move people's circadian rhythm. Whereas you might hear people talk about morning larks who are a little bit earlier, night owls are more towards the night, and then everyone's kind of circadian rhythm, we think there's a large genetic component that is connected to that. And so if I have you in controlled settings and I like shove you in a closet and then expose you to light and shove you in a closet and expose you to light, then we do a pretty good job of being able to move that around. Versus the real world, if you work a night shift job and then you're coming home and you're trying to limit your exposure to light, that's really hard because you can't just drive blindfolded. Please, nobody do that. Not a good idea. And so at the real world of actually doing that, some people are able to slide their circadian rhythm a little bit and other people aren't as much. And I've totally forgotten where I was going with that. Or
About catching up on sleep.
Yeah.
So the idea is that I feel like I haven't gotten great quality sleep throughout the week. See, now I'm about to yawn. Sorry. And then feeling like, okay, I'm going to take a nap this weekend. That hopefully that'll catch me up. And so I can start off this next coming week feeling or more caught up. Is that?
Yes. And so that's totally, we know that, your sleep pressure is going to build to a certain point. And that's not often the time of something I hear in the clinic, especially people will get labeled with like narcolepsy, where they're like, I have these episodes of where I just like, I could be in the middle of an engaging conversation and I just pass out. I'm so exhausted, kind of a thing. But if you truly have narcolepsy, you're not going to have a history where you have days or weeks of experiencing insomnia and then days or weeks of experiencing narcolepsy types of symptoms. And so what can happen are people kind of swing back and forth where they are so sleep deprived, then they just crash until they kind of hit a wall. And so in a less exaggerated way, that's what people, especially in the American environment, typically do. Our schedules are more demanding during the week. And so then people will catch up on the weekend. And so let's say if I am someone that I only need 7 hours of sleep or something. For you, it might be 9 hours. For someone else, it might be 10 or 11 hours. There truly are short sleepers. They're very rare, but there are those people who only run on 6 hours.
You hear Donald Trump sleeps like on 4 hours a day.
Right.
And I'm like, how on earth do you do that?
Right. And, I don't really ascribe to conspiracy theories very much, but I guess like the one that I do is probably the short sleepers are the ones who kind of run things and rule the world and are the reason why our systems are as they are, because they're like, I sleep for 5 hours and I wake up and I feel amazing. So you're lazy if you have to sleep like 10 hours.
Yeah. And we need those people. We need the outliers.
Yes.
I want those.
Oh my gosh. Who is the woman? Elizabeth Hasselbeck. I remember seeing something of her. She was on The View for years.
Yeah.
But I remember she's got like 3 or 4 kids. I don't know. But I remember her saying, she's like, I sleep like 5 hours, like 5, maybe 6 hours a day. But she will like do all of her stuff at night. She would work out in the morning, like doing her Bible studies and doing all of her things. And I'm like, woman.
Yeah.
I just would die for a little bit of that.
See, the way that I look at that is God says, no, the world doesn't need 19 hours of you. The world actually needs less of you. So like less is more for the rest of the world. I'm going to let you sleep for longer.
Right.
So he's hiding you.
He is hiding me. He's no, Tori, they don't need that much of you. I'm like, I agree.
There's so many angles we could go with this topic because I have so many questions, but you touched on it here just a minute ago when you said we all have these busy schedules, and our American culture is, how are you? I'm good, busy. You busy, like
Mhm.
it's like a badge of honor. And I have been working so hard these last few years to slow down and have more peace and have more rest because I know that's what my body needs to show up for my husband and 4 kids. But it is difficult in these, crazy seasons. We just moved this last year, there's so much change that happens. My point is that everybody has a different, a capacity, let's put it that way.
Mhm.
And we all have our, I'm tired, exhausted mom phases, that we go through. And I'm saying moms, this is everybody. It's
Right.
dads too.
Absolutely. Oh, for
Like
sure.
the dads are tired too.
Mhm.
But in all of that though, what would you say? Obviously, your journal is fantastic. We'll be sharing that in our show notes and things. What are some other just general tips that you can give, you know, our listeners? And I'll throw in this last piece. Sorry to throw this in, but our hormones, they control a lot of things, and sleep is part of that. So if we don't have the whole, hey, I'm going to go see a sleep doctor, like some should, but what's your best advice for our
Whole
listeners?
She's literally asking you to solve world peace. I don't think you're like,
Girl,
no, no.
I want a good takeaway for these mamas who are tired.
I think they got a couple, but go ahead, Dr. Benjamin Long. Solve world peace by getting everyone to sleep better.
Yes, please. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah. One of the things I come back to frequently is putting it in your schedule to look at what have I committed myself to, at least like
Mhm.
annually? Like we're having this conversation in like the new year kind of period.
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
often it's the new year resolutions and stuff like that. And so you don't necessarily have to make resolutions per se, but I think having a moment where you put all of the cards on the table and you're actually like, okay, my kid is in 5 different extracurriculars, and then we're doing this and we're going here. And I have like this kind of commitment at work. Just put it all on the table and
Mhm.
make as much of it negotiable as possible, and seeing
Yeah.
like, you know, is there something in my life that needs to change? Because so often when I'm talking to families, I have them walk through a complete 24-hour period. Like start at you wake up and then go all the way 24 hours until you wake up again. And what is happening in your life, and give me kind of everything in a typical day. And what's interesting is there's so many times where people look at me and they're like, I can't even give you like a typical day because on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we do this. And on Tuesday, Thursdays, we do this. But then on Saturdays, they're here. And then Sundays, we're doing church and all this kind of stuff. And so I try to take as much of that as possible.
Mhm.
And yeah, there are things that we can do in the night, like if you are in that season of talking about sleep training, that's a whole kind of conversation. And then another thing, if you are in a season of hormones and you're going perimenopausal, and talking about that with your doctor and kind of options of things like that to kind of help support that, because that at its root is going to be a big precipitating factor to
Mhm.
interrupt your sleep. So there are all these things, but it's like if I'm just trying to kind of that story of the finger in the dam for the, like the water kind of thing, I'm just
Mhm.
trying to
Yeah.
kind of stop it,
Mhm.
but there's this huge problem of we overextend ourselves beyond kind of what we have the capacity for, because and like some level our culture, that's the default, like you can just continue to engage in more and more and more and consume more and more and do all this stuff,
Mhm.
and then we're wondering why am do I feel so spent and exhausted and stuff like that. And so we can try to reach for band-aids and for sleep aids
Mhm.
or for things of that nature, or I can have like a real moment where I sit down and I need to be able to kind of pull all the cards on the table. And I'll just
Mhm.
add the one caveat here. There are some people who do not have the privilege to be able to do that too.
Mhm.
Like, the mama who's working 3+ jobs and doesn't get any sleep because she is providing for her family and she's like a single mother and takes the bus to her, third job kind of thing, and then might
Mhm.
like doze off on the train or the bus or something like that. Like there is that reality too that I feel like we have to acknowledge at some level. And I think that gets us back to the community and the connectedness
Mhm.
of our sleep. And we're very individualistic in America. And so we think about my sleep and my priority. And what's interesting in the Bible is we see sleep as communal. One of my favorite passages comes from Exodus chapter 22, where there's this like long list of different laws that God is setting out for the people of Israel. And there's this quick one that talks about giving back a poor man his cloak. And it goes, if you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, so the poor person, they have nothing else to give as collateral except their cloak. God commands that the debtor give that back to that person at night, because it says, "For what else will he sleep in? He'll cry out to me and I will hear him because I'm gracious." And then in Deuteronomy, it actually talks about it as being an act of righteousness for this person to give back this person their cloak. So, in one aspect, we can see this really beautiful picture that God does actually care about my sleep. And
Mhm.
so I think that's one big thing when we're talking about people who are in that isolating season of insomnia and wonder, like, does anybody actually see me? Like, it feels like I'm all by myself here. And I think part of that when we're thinking about the Christian walk, and so often we think about it of me changing something within myself to be a better person or something like that, when really it's more about getting the kingdom of heaven into me. And I think part of that in the sleepless night is getting that deep in me that I understand that God does care for my sleep and does care for me and knows what season I am in right now.
Mhm.
He's not surprised by it. And yet there's this, beautiful picture that we have in the Christian faith that God is a God who never needs to sleep, who never grows weary or fatigued or tired, and yet chose to enter creation, incarnation as Jesus, to experience, of all things, sleeplessness,
Mhm.
and then now is available to us through the Holy Spirit and can truly empathize what it means to experience that sleeplessness and that isolation and that loneliness. And
Mhm.
so it's like God not only cares for you, he has experienced it himself in Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I think that is this beautiful picture of, if God, who is so far above me, is able to step down and come into creation, we see that character in that passage in Exodus of God caring for his neighbor's sleep. And so much, if I'm talking to a family or something like that, it's like, you're the one that you're already experiencing all of this, like, sleeplessness and crazy schedules and things like that. And yes, we're all experiencing those things, but how can we think outside of just us individually? And maybe, one, is there a way that I can think about this within my church setting, within my small group setting, or things of that nature? Like, we're really good about bringing, meals and a meal train for a little bit when moms have new baby, but then, there's not necessarily that same offer, that same support of, if you're in the middle of the night, and yeah, maybe I might not be able to, like, come and help you out or sit with you, but I'm a good sleeper. You can interrupt my sleep and call me and I am here for you. Like, that is something that could be really powerful for someone who's experiencing insomnia. And so I mentioned all of that to say we can do these things to try and kind of point us in the right direction, but then also we need to think, who is in my circle of influence and how can we, engage in one another's suffering and bear that with each other.
That's so good. And again, that's a beautiful perspective, of because it is true. It is a mental, it's even spiritual when you are struggling in those seasons. And it's great to be able to share it with your community in hopes that someone can either come in and, you know, sit with the child while you go sleep or come help with whatever is, overwhelming while you get some rest.
And the perspective is great because we think of it as like, okay, yeah, yeah, food, sleep, drink, water, like those are the necessities. But how often do we ask our family, but how is your sleep? Because
Mhm.
it is playing such an important part in their overall health too, whether that's mental, physical, or emotional. Like,
Mm.
because if you're not getting great sleep, you may be a little cranky. Not that I'm speaking from experience or anything. Like, don't ask my family. That's not allowed to talk to me before coffee. But that's that's not something that we tend to ask. It's not how are like, hey, how are you? In that shallow question of, oh yeah,
Mhm.
we're good. I'm tired. Like, oh, just hey, is there, like, hey, is there an afternoon that I can, the kids can come over with me? Or, hey, maybe one night your kids spend the night at my house and,
Yeah.
you and your husband have a date night or go to
Mhm.
bed early.
Yeah.
There's that beautiful gift too.
Mhm.
So I love that you shared that perspective and just that mind shift for
Mhm.
us, Doctor. Well, this has been fantastic and great. And clearly we're going to have you on again because
I have more questions.
Tracy's got more questions.
Yeah.
She's going to continue to ask you how to solve world peace and get us all some
Clearly,
sleep.
it's something that I'm like, just it's laughable that I've had issues with this for so many years and I've never asked these questions.
Yes. And again, how you've never heard get up if you don't like
No.
that. I don't know how that does not press. We need to talk more, clearly.
Yeah.
But no, thank you. Thank you for doing what you do and for also doing what you do and bringing it back to God.
Mhm.
Because how often do we have our purposes and then, and great, like obviously sleep. I connected to that in residency school. Like, that's what I want to do. I'm not going to cut into bodies, but I'm going to help people sleep. Fantastic. But what does God say about sleep? Because I think that resonates with so many Christians because we search the Bible for anxiousness. We search the Bible for what do we do when we're worrying. We search the Bible for, like, how do we have relationship with others? But have we searched for it for our health? Have we searched the words for our sleep and for all the things? Like, it really is the book of life, and that includes sleep. So thank you so much for sharing that and helping others, and especially those mamas with the young babies that aren't getting the sleep. So thank you so much, Doctor. And where can our audience find you, connect with you, and if they want more information, get that from you?
Yeah, absolutely. The best place would be sleephabitsjournal.com. That'll just take you straight to the book, but it's also on my website. So then you can navigate from there to learn more about me or sign up for my newsletter. Then on social media, I'm on Instagram and TikTok because I feel like that's a necessity now with the kids, of at the wholehearted MD. Or if you just Google Dr. Benjamin Long, there's one or two of us that, are like somewhere in Illinois or in Florida or something like that, but I'm pretty sure you'll find me. So
Yeah, the one in Texas. The one in
one in
Texas.
Texas.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you so much again,
Yeah,
Doctor.
thank you.
And we so appreciate it. And until next time, housewives.
Bye.
Bye.